Simply Trade listeners. We're back with another episode of the Simply Trade News Roundup. And, last week, first of all, my name's Anik, and we have Andy in the studio. Hi, Andy. How are you?
Good morning, everybody, and good morning, Anik.
Yes, good. It's good afternoon for me. But, we've been talking, we have been doing these news roundup for, however long. And we were always as three. I feel like we never had where it's just two people, right? And now here we are, because 2 weeks ago it was just Lalo and I, and now it's Andy and I. So I feel like I get the one-on-ones with each one of you guys, which is also kind of fun, right? And if you're listening, let us know what you think of this. Are you missing having three people in the studio, or is this okay for you too? But no, Lalo will be back. We did not fire him, or he did. He did not.
He's getting a well-deserved vacation. He and Elsa, his wife.
He is, well deserved. So that'll be great. He will be back in it's like 2 weeks. So you'll have to figure it out with us now. Sorry about that. If you don't want that, you can definitely log off, but please don't, because we have some fun articles for you today.
Got some serious stuff here to talk about today.
Yeah, because I came on, truth be told, I came on and I said, Andy, I don't know, today might be kind of boring. I don't know if these are good. And he goes, oh, no, what? These are serious. We got lots of stuff to cover. So I don't know. I'm wondering too what we have going on here. So let me get into the first article, so I'm not talking your ears off. First one, China is freezing properties of 9 U.S. firms over arms sales to Taiwan. The targeted companies include Sierra Nevada Corporation and Lockheed Martin. Wow, that's a huge one. And I guess you can get more into that. So the countermeasures seen as Beijing's response to U.S. actions are deemed provocative. So it's kind of reflecting the tension in U.S.-China relations. And this could probably lead to, is right now, potential trade implications and geopolitical conflicts. But let's hear it from you, Andy. What is your kind of thought process and stance on this whole thing?
All right. So what's happening is that China is upset with some companies, some U.S. companies. Now, these companies that they froze the assets on, basically, are not the ones selling the weapons. But basically, the U.S. has sold weapons to Taiwan to help defend themselves or empower Taiwan to defend themselves. So as a result, China then is putting sanctions, if you will, as well as freezing the assets, or the property as they call it, of 9 U.S.-based companies that are doing business in China.
Lockheed Martin is a big one.
Yeah. Well, and Lockheed Martin is a big in the aerospace, but also military contracts and all that. But the other is that this is no different than the U.S. putting sanctions on Russian companies that are trying to do things. China's just doing the same thing in for their interest, and they're upset with the U.S. selling these weapons. So they're taking it out on and freezing the assets of these American companies. So that's, in a sense, all they're trying to do here. And they're, threatening this and that. It's saber rattling, as we would call it. But here's the thing. If you are a U.S. company and you're doing business in China, in this geopolitical strife, if you will, between China and Taiwan, and the U.S. government is supporting, obviously, Taiwan, you better get ready to potentially lose your assets or have them frozen, because this is the thing. Your action in this is China is playing hardball here, and as it's ramping up, obviously China wants to take action against Taiwan, and they don't like the fact that Taiwan now has more weapons. China has enough military might that they could really probably take Taiwan. The problem is that can they do it without casualties or without losses? And Taiwan having the ability to fight back at least will cause some losses. In addition, you have other countries around the world that would be willing to stand up to Taiwan. So I look at this as other countries that have companies doing business in China have the potential of their assets being frozen as well. So just understand that China's not playing with this. And it's not just like, oh, well, we'll get along. And China's playing some hardball here. So again, look and make your assessment. If you're an American company, do you want to pull your assets out while you can? Minimize your transactions in China. And third, you better continue to start looking at other sources to for your supply chain, because China's, this is difficult for them.
So I guess I kind of want to go into the third article before we get into the second one, just because it is talking also U.S. China economic relations. So basically, going from China, we're just moving straight over to China again. The upcoming talks between senior U.S. officials and their Chinese counterparts in Beijing, the focus will be on addressing concerns regarding China's industrial overcapacity and its impact on the global economy. So the focus, there will be a focus on addressing the impact of China's manufacturing exports on global markets and American industries. It also is saying that the discussions expected to shape the future of U.S.-China economic relations and international trade dynamics. That sounds like a really big sentence, like what it will do for the future. But I'm not sure, because looking at what we just heard on the last article, it seems like there is not really a good interaction right now with the U.S. and China. So I don't know, moving into this conversation, I mean, what is there even how do you even address this?
Well, it's okay. So here's the thing is that the current administration is basically dealing with a symptom. And it's funny. I will tell you this gives some indications here that, all right, China's notice what I say, it's over capacity or basically producing more goods than have been consumed so far. And so now there's this glutton of product in China that the U.S. is worried that now China's going to come in and start dumping that into the U.S. and other countries around the world. Folks, what the deal is that this tells me that more than the China sanctions, remember the U.S., the Trump sanctions, you're going to call them 301 tariffs against the Chinese goods that are coming in. I think what's happened is this is an indication that the Chinese government, let me rephrase that, the Chinese economy is actually in worse shape than what most people realize, because they've been producing their goods and people are not buying them. Why is that? Well, the issue is not so much with the 301 tariffs, which I think it may have some effect. I think the issue is that the forced labor regulations and legislation have gone through in the U.S., it's in Canada, it's in Mexico, it's in Europe, where people are finally taking a hard stand against slave labor, if you will, forced labor, slave labor. And people are moving away from China as it being a source for their supply chain. As such, China has been continuing to produce goods. And so what is it that they've got? They've got a lot of electric cars and other equipment and different things and commodities. The point being is, what do you do with this? Again, as we're looking at this, and we just talked about how China is freezing the assets of American companies. Why? Because of the issue with Taiwan and Taiwan being able to defend itself. And now they've got all these other things. So they're hurt. They're going, the thought is that China is going to be hurting the economy of the U.S. and other countries by bringing in goods and dropping the prices basically is called dumping. And that's what they're going to be talking about. I don't anticipate that these particular talks will do anything. I think this flood of goods are still going to come out. If you can get them, you're still going to have the 301 tariffs. But again, I would be looking at, moving to other sources. And if you are an American citizen and you're wanting to look at things, just don't buy Chinese goods if you're trying to have an impact on that. If people are not buying those goods made in China, then the Walmarts and the Targets and the big box stores and all that are not going to be buying that stuff. They'll find other sources. And that's how you can deal with it on the average thing. As far as the global markets, again, you're just going to have to be aware that what you're dealing with and all that. Now, let me also say this on a side note. This is not one of the articles, Anik, but China has just recently sold $660 million worth of U.S. Treasury bills. That's our debt. They've bought our debt. They've sold that, and they're buying billions of dollars of gold. Why? To protect their economy and all that. If you look at what all this is transpiring, freezing the assets, looking at all these goods that China's going to try and move around the world and hit the economies. Quite frankly, they're going to be hurting, Western economies with all this. Selling the treasury bills and buying gold, I think that China is gearing up to take action against Taiwan. And, what's that going to do? So, I've talked about this before. If China is your main source for goods, Taiwan is another main source, especially for computer chips or microprocessors and all. If China takes action against Taiwan, now you have about 30% of the world's supply chain sources of supply chain goods tied up. So if China takes action, what do you think is going to happen? Theoretically, the U.S. is going to cut off goods from China. China will shut down goods coming out of Taiwan. So now what are you going to do? So folks, that's where I'm looking at is like, you got to play smart and you better do it now. You got to look at other countries for sources of goods and be prepared that if there's a major disruption of that with both Chinese and Taiwanese goods, how are you going to handle that? I think it's coming.
I think talking to small businesses too, because I know that China is like a cheap source for a lot of businesses, especially, these kind of small businesses. So keeping it, I don't know, rather local, which it can be more pricey. See, I understand the discrepancy that's there. So having to pay a little bit more. But I feel like ultimately you'll probably be on a safer route than going the China route. Or, what would you do? What would you do if you need something cheaper because you don't have the funds to go, pay more for your material or whatever? Like, what can you do at that point?
Well, I would just say that in looking at it, again, you better be finding other sources that if you are completely dependent on China or Taiwan, and Taiwan's a strong ally, but if their goods are cut off and you're dependent on that, you are up a proverbial creek because if it's cut off, just stop and think. You're not going to, it's just a matter of time for your inventory is wiped out and you have nothing else. So that's where I just look at it. You've got to diversify your supply chain. It also comes back into the issue of talking about nearshoring. That's just another term for supply chain and sources.
And that's come up really big this year, right?
Right. And so why nearshoring? Well, China is so far away, the transportation costs and the cycle times is one thing. If you're nearshoring and you're using other countries, like in the US, I would say, again, you got Canada and Mexico, it's you're offsetting some of the things with the long transit times with shorter distances, and you can use trucks and stuff like that. The point being is that it brings it regionally back home. And so, yeah, you may pay a little bit more in some things, but you're offsetting it with lower transportation costs and or your cycle times are there or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I think nearshoring is a really good answer here to this problemo. But actually, the second one kind of involves China too, a little bit, because so the White House is proposing, yeah, the White House proposes changes to the de minimis exemption. I think we've talked about this for 2 weeks now. It's still in the talks, impacting e-commerce companies like Temu and Shein, which those are Chinese companies, and they have also been, or Shein at least, they had some allegations of forced labor. I don't want to make any false allegations, but
Oh, it's actually they have found goods that Timu and Shin, they actually been raising it up. The problem has been in recent things with the Department of Commerce and the State Department as well with these two companies is they have not really been doing anything to try and prevent the forced labor use, and they've actually doubled down on it. They don't care about our stuff. So what they're doing, folks, if you see it, you see it on Facebook and TikTok
so
and
many
Instagram and all.
ads too.
So many ads, and and you look at it, it's like, you know what? There's some pretty good deals on stuff, and you look at it. But here's what's happening: a lot of those goods are made with forced labor, but they're still coming in. Now, here's the other thing. They're When you order online and it's coming from a foreign source, if the goods are less than $800, you can take advantage of what's called the de minimis exemptions. And in that, the de minimis it's so low in value that it's not worth putting an entry into the process and clogging it all up. So it's cleared kind of like a document. It's just off the manifest. The problem is that, all right, first off, people get hung up on, oh, you mean to tell me up to $800 we can do that in duty and tax free and all that? The average value of these de minimis shipments is still only about $65. So in looking at that, it's like, folks, don't get hung up on it. It's so expensive, whatever. We're allowing, all these goods coming in. It's still $65 is what most people are ordering and whatnot. That's one thing. But the other is, this is where the problem is. The de minimis is there as a means to keep, stimulate the international trade. It's low dollar stuff and all that. But Shein and Timu and companies like that have been bringing in these massive containers with this de minimis, and they've not been. Customs has been just overwhelmed. The express carriers had and promoted the use of this, which was great. But the express carriers, I don't know if you have to know this or not, but they have what's called reimbursables. That's where we need to be pushing this, is that for customs to process this many shipments, the express carriers have a electronic manifest system so that customs can review some of these things. They'll make their selections for exam. They can test to see, is it forced labor or not? Is it you're saying it's a 3-ring notebook binder? Is it really a 3-ring notebook binder? Stuff like that. All right. They go through that. So there's a lot of money spent on providing the tools to customs so that they can review this stuff. And there's an added reimbursable fee. I think it's now about $2.50 a shipment. Yeah, don't quote me on that. It's whatever it is. So for every one of these, and so there'd be thousands of these that customs charges for the reimbursable, and they have to pay that for customs to be on site and process it. Now, you take a Timu container or a Shein container and it comes in, they're not paying that reimbursable. It is a manual manifest and whatever. And customs is standing there going, how am I going to process, these thousands of shipments in this 40-foot container or whatever on a truck or whatever? That's where I personally have an issue to say, customs, you need to force back and say, and we need to be pushing the regulations to say, if you're going to use the de minimis and bring in these thousands of shipments less than $800 and process it, you need to provide customs with the tools and mechanisms to electronically select and review the manifest of the goods, know who it's coming from and who it's going to, and then have the physical facilities to literally, you pop the doors on it and you literally sort through every single one of those, that they're all accounted for as they go through it. And then customs can also look at it. And here people keep saying, well, we need regulations to require entries. The regulations are already there. Customs looks at it and says, I'm going to require an entry of this. The customs agent could look at it and say, I require an entry for every one of these packages. Then the onus is on, it comes back to the importers. But then to me, I'm like, in this de minimis, it's the shipper seller that's causing all that. So it's like, to me, I would just put the onus back on them and say, you've got to have entries for all of this, or a consolidated entry for the whole thing, or the whole shipments. All these shipments are refused. So coming back, what the Biden administration is trying to propose is, well, you've got to go through and make sure that the items requiring the 301 tariffs, the 232 tariffs, the 201 tariffs, all those kinds of things that are going on, well, that's requiring entry. I'm like, okay, but you still are back to, if there's something that requires an entry, the customs inspector can require it. It still doesn't solve the problem where the customs does not have the tools, because we're allowing this. If you're going to use the de minimis program, keep this in mind, folks. If you are a retailer out there and all that, you need to be pushing this with your trade associations. Is that if anybody is coming in from a foreign source, especially, and wanting to use the de minimis, then they need to provide the facilities and tools for customs to do it, and it needs to be reimbursable, so it's not such a drain on their resources.
Yeah. And you know what I thought about too is, like, I think people are not as educated on forced labor as they should be, especially consumers. I mean, I with companies, yeah, you need to get your training in. I think every company needs to be trained on forced labor specifically, just because it is such a hot topic and it is ongoing. Like, it's not just a thing that shouldn't be pushed under the rug. It's something we should be proactive about. But so should consumers. The reason why Shein and Temu are so powerful is because people buy their stuff. And I understand it. I mean, it's cheap, right? Some people, but they're also not aware. They're also not aware of it.
I know. Well, it's hundreds of millions. I mean, you look at something that's like, hey, I really need, a set of tools, a blouse, some pants, an earbuds and stuff. I get all that. And it's like, hey, I need all that. And it's a great price, man. It's dirt cheap. But what you don't see, and this is where I guess, to me, if the journalists really wanted to make a difference here, tell the story of the people manufacturing it. These are people that are out of Mongolia and the Shenzhen area, the Huawei, not Huawei, excuse me, Uyghurs. The Uyghurs have been forced out of their home area and pulled down into these camps to work in factories, and they're forced to do it.
Like, they sleep in the factories, I've seen. Hi, Mara. Yeah, we're done. We're catching up. We're done. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to even bring it up. Our producer just came in. Guys, she just told us that we're taking way too long. But you know what? We're done. Joke's on you, because we have just a fun fact for you. The fun fact is, you know what? It's because today I saw pumpkins. I know it's not pumpkin weather yet, but Starbucks does have pumpkin lattes already. So we can talk about pumpkins. Do you know what the leading countries in pumpkin imports are? Such a weird. Yeah. Well, the United States is first with 481 million. France is second with 203 million, and Germany is third with 195 million. But what a weird question, huh?
In other words, there are countries that are importing pumpkins or exporting
Yeah,
them.
importing.
I didn't know that the U.S. was importing that many pumpkins because we have farmers that produce those like crazy.
Well, yeah, that's what's happening. Anywho, that was my fun fact of the day. I hope you can use it on your nightly dinner. Ooh, you have okay. Nightly dinner situation. And that is all. So we hope to see you next week back again. It'll be Andy and I. Hopefully Renee joins us maybe. And yeah, let us know how we did and let us know if you have any questions or whatever. Thank you so much, Andy, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest in the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.